Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, watch a Doctor Who story chosen by a friend of mine, commentate along, drop in facts and observations, and try to guess what my special guest's favourite things about the episode might be.
Hey, hello Haydocklings. My name's Allan Lear and I'm sort of an improv comedian and generally just a friend of Toby's. And he's asked me to come along and have a word with you about one of my favourite episodes of Doctor Who for this new podcast that he's doing. Well, I didn't have to think twice about my choice. One of my absolute favourites is The Curse of Fenric, because Sylvester McCoy was my Doctor growing up, and The Curse of Fenric really stuck in my mind. It terrified me at the time, and I rewatched it recently for this, and it really does stand up, I think, exceptionally well for a Doctor Who from that period. So I'm just going to give you a little rundown of some of my favourite things about it.
Hello everybody, and welcome to this edition of Happy Times and Places, as Alan says there, this new podcast of Toby's. That's how early I asked Alan, who is the husband, is it the first husband and wife team we've had do this? Because Erica Lear, who is his wife, chose The Curse of Fenric a while ago. I mean, both of them did this a while ago. As Alan said, it was when this was a new podcast. So I think he did this kind of podcast sight unseen, or, hearing unheard, because this was very early. I have to say, I was slightly disappointed with Erica and Alan, because they both chose absolute classics. Do you know what I mean? I was quite funky with my friends, going, oh yeah, John Cooper's chosen Time Flight, and John Turner's chosen Battlefield. These are some of the early ones. And then Alan and Erica come straight with Caves Ranzani, Curse of Fenric, bona fide classics. Which is maybe why I've made them wait to do these. Alan undersells himself, actually. He's an excellent improv comic. I have actually seen him save a night that involved the comedian Tony Sattery, who I was, delighted to work with, and a real pleasure to have under the roof of my comedy club. But Alan was very much the guiding force, the sort of unsung hero on the stage, who often, not only had an eye on being funny, but had an eye on making sure that the night steered in the right direction, and with improv, getting audience suggestions and all that, and sort of filtering that, and keeping the show going when it threatened to get wayward and stuff. And he controlled Tony Slattery's talent, shall we say. So I was very impressed with that. And Alan and I go back a long way, and we speak the same language and have often done so. And he's helped me in the past and is a good egg, and actually is currently been doing so. Actually, long after he recorded this, been going through my Quatermass books with a fine tooth comb, and pointing out typos, bad grammar, etc., etc. He's been proofreading for me, basically, as a favour, and doing a really good job of it. So I'm very grateful to Alan. If you ever need a proofreader, I can thoroughly recommend Alan. He does it quickly but very well, and doesn't leave a stone unturned, or a comma unspaced, or whatever. And he's chosen The Curse of Fenric, a story that I was obsessed with as a youth. I spent a lot of my time, I've said this before, as a teenager, being very cross with Doctor Who and always thinking it was better in the old days, etc., etc. But this was a story I loved. I loved so much, I wrote my own film version of it without the Doctor and Ace. I created these other characters, and we were going to do it because we didn't live by the coast, but there was a river in Ludlow where we could have doubled up as a sort of inlet, and all of that, and I think I accounted for that in the script. And I was going to get all my mates to do it, and yes. I mean, I was forever doing that. I'm sure there are people who design album covers for their band without actually writing a song. I was very much like that. It was the sort of fun was in the planning of it, without actually doing any of the the practical making of the artistic stuff. But we I'd cast all my friends in it, and yeah, it's all very exciting. But we just never did sourced some of the costumes because I had a mate who could, had some second-hand military costumes. So we got I got a couple of the Russian bits, and then we had a school trip to Russia as well. Well, anyway, I'm sure I will get into all of that. But I was obsessed with this story. I watched it over and over again. I mean, I could have probably quoted it line by line. So I'm going to have no trouble loving this. I suspect it won't be a disappointment. Haven't watched it for ages, actually. Speaking now, I think perhaps I should have watched it for fun before doing this. But never mind. We're gonna go for episode 1, and I'm doing the as broadcast version, I believe, of The Curse of Fenric. So, I might get to do other versions of this down the line as extras or bonuses or alternatives, but we're going to go with the ads broadcast because there are many different versions of The Curse of Fenric, but the one I know best is the one that was broadcast on the television on the 25th of October 1989. So with that in mind, shall we go for episode 1 of The Curse of Fenric in 3, 2, 1. I'd actually I'd met Sylvester McCoy. Some friends of mine had organised some sort of pick-up litter campaign or something in Wolverhampton, and we got to chaperone Sylvester McCoy for that day, and he turned up in costume. I do have a photo. He turned up in costume, and it's one of the few photos of my Doctor Who scarf that got eaten by moths that still exist. And he'd said, oh, this one, The Curse of Fenric, we're trying to get it to go out as 5 episodes because there's so much material. So and I remember asking, is Dinsdale Landon the lead, the guest, the main guest star? Because I'd read about Dinsdale Landon being in it, and I don't think I actually knew who he was, which almost gave him even more kudos. It's all right to be an actor I've heard of, but to be an actor with a name like Dinsdale Landon, I think I'd got an inkling that he was a famous actor, but I don't think I knew him for anything. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I was sort of geared up that this story might be pretty cool. A war setting is always great. Doctor Who with soldiers was always very exciting to me. I love the fact that they're speaking in Russia and we've got subtitles. But I was always disappointed with those subtitles. I was like, why have they got sort of dot matrix, big, slightly childish subtitles? Why have they not just gone for normal subtitles? It was almost like going, yes, we're in a program that children watch, so we have to make the subtitles a bit sort of big and basic and childish. And I think on the special edition they just make them normal subtitles, which is quite right, because it's one of the few things I don't like is the subtitles in this. But even though I love the fact that they start speaking in Russian, and because there's so much in this, it's really brisk. Love that opening scene with the Doctor and Ace, and the way it stops on McCoy looking around as if there's something up. I love this incidental music. I adored the fact that it was Russians. I got really into Russia. I'd just been to see a Chekhov play. Stop. At Stratford upon Avon, and I'd the only Chekhov I knew was the guy from the Starship Enterprise, but I my first proper girlfriend, really, her family, and I think that I didn't think they really approved of me because they were aspirational, and anyway, let's not get into that. But they took me to see The Seagull by Anton Chekhov at Stratford, and I absolutely loved it. Christian Anholt went on to be in loads, had a great career for a bit. I met him recently. He's quite muscly and good looking. Son of Tony Anholt, who was in Howard's Way and Space 1999 and stuff, and coffee adverts. But Christian Anholt was a bit of a film star. And I like this, but I always think this is an odd point to tell. I buy that we've got to speak in English because of the mission, and it actually becomes quite important, and it means you don't have to have subtitles for the whole thing. But it is a bit odd that Prozorov's sort of run up from the beach and obviously said something like, something's going down on the beach, and he's gone, no, do it again, but this time in English. I could understand if it was a bit later and he sort of gone, the moon is drawing, and he goes, yeah, okay, now we have to speak in English. But sort of in the middle of a kind of, there's a disaster. Yes, wait, I am not going to do anything, Sergeant Protzeroff, until you start speaking in English. The pacing of this is superb. Anne Reid, what a sign that how an actor's career can go, because she's done loads at this point, but it's not. But when she comes back to Doctor Who, she's the guest lead. It's very much a supporting part, Nurse Crane. I mean, it's a good supporting part because it's a good script, and pretty much all of the parts are good. This is again the lick that this goes at, the fact that it dispenses with sort of all of the nonsense. I do like the flourish of the Doctor signing both of the bits of paper, and I love the thing that Ace understands, that shows how technology improves. What she learnt about in school is high end stuff for Dr. Judson, who's a wheelchair user, not an actor who's a wheelchair user, because he does have to stand up later. I think he's wonderful, Dinsdale Landon. Stephen Rimkus, another actor who at this time suddenly started doing everything. I was very surprised to discover he's very Scottish. He was in a thing called Conquest of the South Pole not long after, which was a South Pole, North Pole, which was a movie, I think, based on a play set in a sort of rough housing estate where they a load of people on the fringes of society recreated the conquest of the pole. But he was also in Prick Up Your Ears, and he was in a production of Elidor, and when he was in The Bill, he did a really good one where he was a policeman who'd gone undercover as a football hooligan, and it felt like Doctor Who was lucky to get him, really, because he was doing other bigger stuff around this. It's still a decent part in this, but it's he had better parts. But again, he's another one that, well, he kind of then has kind of receded into the distance a bit like Christian Anholt. They both went on to flourish for 10 years or so, but I think have not had such a good time of it latterly. It's a cruel business. Whereas this guy, Mark Conrad, as Petrosian, I don't think has done much else at all. We haven't seen much of him. Love Tomek Bork as Captain Sorin, and of course, I actually even like these two guys. The guy on the beach, Gaev, with his scratches on his neck, and this underwater shooting is excellent. There's so much that's great about this. I think this the scene where Petrosian runs away in a moment is slightly awkward, just because of the way that it's shot. His run looks slightly comical. There are two or three tiny bits that I'm sure I will mention, because they always slightly worried me, because again, I wanted to show this to people to show how brilliant Doctor Who was these days, because I as I say, I absolutely loved this. And I remember being furious because this to me was the best Doctor Who episode in ages. I'd like Ghostlight, but I had found it a bit too confusing for the modern audience, as it were. But this, I thought, everyone would love. And for the trailer, they showed this bit, and it's like, I mean, come on! Of all the bits you could show in this really exciting episode, you show that sort of slightly comical exchange. I just think that the angle that this is shot at makes his run away look slightly comical. I don't think it's his fault. It's just one of those things. But it's so tight, isn't it? And then you've got the Doctor wandering around being mysterious, which is great. I mean, Perkins is all set up for somebody to either do something heroic in Part 4 or die horribly in Part 4. And actually, you just don't see him in Part 4, but we'll get to that. Eyes watching. I mean, this hasn't let up at all. There is a bit, isn't it, when... Is it when Sylvester McCoy's just signed the two bits of paper and he goes, Dr. Judson's work at translating the German ciphers is very important. And the way that he does it, suggest is something I've observed with Sylvester McCoy, is that he's not always on top of his lines, and he will sometimes say a sentence in a way, he will stress words just to buy him a little bit of time to get the rest of the sentence in his head. And I think that Dr. Judson's work in translating the German ciphers is very important to the raw effort, is one where you can see that the rhythm is dictated by his memory. Janet Henfrey, who turned up in Mummy on the Orient Express, she's a lovely woman. She's one of those actresses that has always sort of played, sort of similar. She played quite a lot of similar parts. She's obviously teachers in two of the Dennis Potters. She's a very good actress, stalwart. And Joanne Kenny and Joanne Bell. Joanne Kenny, who I'd forgot, I didn't instantly recognise, was in Grange Hill. And is now sadly no longer with us, died rather young. I love this scene, and having watched the special edition, I think, again, it's truncated from a slightly longer sequence, but there's something so enigmatic and weird about this. And I know they cheat, don't they, slightly, because naval officers weren't allowed facial hair, but they wanted the Hitler look. And I love the way he sort of comes out of his reverie, Alfred Lynch as Millington, and the sort of, even the way that he holds his wrist and then holds his finger in his hand and contemplates the chess with Mark Ayres' excellent score. For a scene with no dialogue that is just there to establish this slightly strange character of Commander Millington, I love that scene. I don't know why, it's one of my favourite scenes in Doctor Who, and I don't quite know why. I just think it's beautifully evocative. Not to mention Nicholas, I remember being furious that Nicholas Parsons had been cast in Doctor Who, and he's absolutely fantastic in this. And again, look at that on the neck, vampiric, and the body's kind of white and drained, which is very good. And I remember there was an early clip that I caught, in a trailer for forthcoming season, and it had, Sylvester McCoy and Nicholas Parsons, and it's the bit where, he says to the Doctor, "I'm afraid I don't understand," and the Doctor says, "Afraid, yes, but of what?" And in isolation, I wasn't convinced by Parsons, and I thought, oh God, is he going to be a bit limp and a bit wooden? He's absolutely brilliant in this, and I hats off to John Nathan Turner, because it was the sort of casting that would kind of get attention. It was also, though, the sort of casting that would annoy people like me who wanted Doctor Who to be taken very, very seriously. But I have to say, there is something good about seeing. Now, I know William Gaunt is a very, serious classical actor and always has been, but he was very well known for the sitcom No Place Like Home. So seeing him as Orsini and seeing my brothers and sisters going, "Oh yeah, he's that guy from that." Wow, and seeing Nicholas Parsons, it's like when Bob Monkhouse did a straight performance in something, I can't remember what now, and because you're used to seeing somebody being funny all the time, seeing them actually turn up and deliver the business, and Parsons really does in this, gives something an extra quality to it. That's why it's always nice to see actors that doing something different, especially if they are so convincing at doing something different, which is why we don't always like seeing people we don't know in stuff. There is a reason people use names, is because we quite enjoy watching the craft of acting. And that's something that's, there's a lot of debate about at the moment, because we even now had recently Michael Sheen saying, he didn't, and the press spun it. He wasn't making a demand, but he was saying, he wasn't always over the moon when non-Welsh actors played Welsh. And actually the art of the character actor, I do enjoy watching, but I do understand, authenticity and lived experience as well. But I think great actors, great craftspeople, I always say a good actor, you don't cast a bus driver as the bus driver, cast an actor as the bus driver, because a good actor knows more about the bus driver than a bus driver knows about himself. A good actor has to be a good, psychoanalyst, or also has to be able to transmit something about the character's thoughts that the character themselves doesn't actually understand or know they're transmitting. There is a craft to acting. And as I say, not everyone is a technical actor. Some people just have the skill of doing that instinctively, or they convey it because they've very good at, having their thoughts show in their face without actually doing anything. And that can be an innate talent, but also, craft. Oh, I've just seen somebody coming out of the sea. I have never seen that before. I've got it on a big screen just in the corner where when McCoy was talking to Ace there, I just saw somebody popping out of the sea. Never seen that before. But again, they're zipping about all over the place, and I don't think it harms this at all. I think it really keeps the story going. Now, Alfred Lynch, I didn't think I knew, but I had actually seen the film The Hill, which my brother had got out when we rented a video machine for about a month before, and then I think my brother didn't pay for it, and so then they came and got it back. And he hired out a movie called The Hill with Sean Connery, and Alfred Lynch is the sort of weedy soldier that is bullied by Ian Hendry and Harry Andrews, and it's a wonderful film, The Hill, stark black and white, directed by Sidney Lumet. Lots of characters getting sweaty and cross with each other in a military prison, and Sean Connery, showing outside of Bond, his acting mettle. I love Dinsdale Landon. It's a great character performance, and Lynch has Landon's doing lots of sort of that Clive Merrison description of vivid acting, which I have no problem with, especially when you're playing a mad scientist who's a wheelchair user. But there's a lovely sort of broken quality to Lynch. I know some people find it odd because he has that slightly slurred delivery, almost like he's got a slight Bell's palsy or a slight stroke or something. Interestingly, he was caring for his partner who had a stroke in many later years, because his partner's James Culliford, who is in the first 2 episodes of Frontier in Space, whose last job that was, who I think had a stroke at around the time that it was going out, and Alfie Lynch, as he was known to his friends, cared for Culliford. I think they lived in Brighton. I think they were mates of John Nathan Turner. So I didn't think I knew Lynch. And again, that gave him a certain quality in my eyes, because, if they were casting, actors in lead roles and I'd not really heard of them, I felt that was a shortcoming on my part. And then, of course, I did a little delving and realised, actually, I had seen him in The Hill, and then he'd done he'd had leads in movies. He'd done another one with Sean Connery, and Landon had this great theatrical pedigree. So I felt I was being educated by Doctor Who. And I think it's lovely casting. Some, as I say, some don't get on with Alfred Lynch, but I think he's wonderful. I think you could go for a sort of gruff, barky military type, but I think his slightly watery eyes. He always had that slightly droopy physiognomy, like he was sort of made of clay and had been rained on, or just cried, and his so there's a sort of forlorn aspect to him, slightly broken man, which sort of ties in with that subtext that they have of him and Judson, which I know then comes out in the book, and the various, so many iterations. I remember being so excited about the book because that was going to expand this, because there is so much that had either been cut or had to be done briefly. It's a story that earns a further delve or allows you to fill in blanks if you want to, and so it made it a very rewarding experience reviewing it, thinking about filling in those blanks or anticipating the book to see if it did. The book changed the names of some of the Russians. Prozorov becomes Trofimov, doesn't he? But what I knew that probably a lot of my friends didn't know, which made me feel very special. But having gone to see the Seagull at Stratford, Jane Russell, and I didn't know about drawing on the back of a leg to show that you've got stockings. Anyway, is that all the Russian soldiers are named after characters in Chekhov plays. So Sorin is in The Seagull. Petrosian, he's in one of them, Three Sisters. Andrei Prozorov is in Three Sisters, but Trofimov is in Cherry Orchard. And this is Peter Tchaikovsky as Prozorov, who went to Manchester University, not with Sophie Aldred, I think, or certainly at around that time, which is and did the course that I ended up doing not that long afterwards. So This was such a special story to me. I used to love it when things like that happen. I've always felt a kind of affinity with it. Gaev is also in Czech. Even the non-speaking guy, Gaev's in Cherry Orchard. And again, I think some of this is in the script, but I know that the brevity, the truncation means we get sort of voiceover bits. Love the dead Russian under the sea. That just felt really kind of sort of grown up stuff, the sort of stuff we hadn't really seen in Doctor Who for a while. So it's got some real sort of horror movie stuff. I like the way they sort of they do that sort of bicker with it. And Corey Pullman, I think, is great. Kathleen is a really convincing character. That yes, there is she has whipped up a time storm and got a Super Ted teddy bear and whipped it back to World War II. And of course, yes. So this is the baby is her mum. The baby. I was in fact I was emailing somebody emailing back and forth. People have tracked down this baby because the baby gets a credit, and of course this baby is now 150 years old. Oh, poor old Ace. It was brave of them to do this kind of subject matter for. I mean, it's a bit embarrassing, that, Ace. I mean, you could have pretended. But it's very brave of them to do this story of, this emotionally damaged teenager who had a bad relationship with her mother, and to thread it through as a sort of as a sort of story arc within Doctor Who is quite advanced and I think quite brave. Another excellent scene. Again, just and the whole baby thing gives us that lovely stuff about the social mores later on. But we'll talk about that when we get to it. Doctor and Ace do have sort of free reign to just sort of wander around, don't they? But no, I think this has everything in it. It's got, I think the World War II setting is really helpful. This is brilliant. It actually turns out to just be a thing that's not actually that relevant to the plot. That he's trying to think the way the Germans think, but it means we get that brilliant establishing scene, and it just makes it very atmospheric and a bit oppressive and a bit scary. And again, Doctor Who, it seems odd now that Doctor Who didn't do World War II as often as maybe one might think it would have done, because it's a great setting. But I remember feeling that it was extremely refreshing to have Russians rather than Germans in it. It just made it again feel a bit less obvious, a bit more grown up. And I remember learning all of the Russian dialogue and being an idiot with it. Anyway, I think I've got to be saying it out loud into a video camera at a party once, because I don't know, I thought I was speaking Russian, man. But we did go to Russia. We had a school trip to Russia. I love the way that he does this. And of course, anything, I'm a sucker. I'm a big Nigel Neal fan. But Nigel Neal's not the only person that does it. Anything that has an ancient text that a good actor can read out and be a bit spooked by, because it's ancient. Anything that is ancient, anything that is old, anything that is musty brings with it death, the passage of time, the undead, skeletons, cobwebs, and really helps. And then you've got the sort of warlike setting as well, which is terrific. And this beach is great, isn't it, with all the white rocks, and having it set by the sea as well, which of course later gives us monsters rising from the sea. It's got it all: vampires, soldiers, ancient text, and a cliffhanger with guns being pointed at the Doctor and Ace, which is a fairly standard and not not amazing cliffhanger, but it doesn't really matter because you kind of go, I've just had a totally satisfying episode of Doctor Who. It's got it all. You know, the mystery, what are the Russians up to? It's got those great characters on the camp. It had the nighttime atmosphere. And it's, it's quite rich in what it's trying to do. I don't think the two, Gene and Phyllis, are I mean, they're hard parts to play, and I don't think, they're one of the sort of least satisfying elements for me, and it's a shame because I remember Joanne Kenny very fondly from Grange Hill, and I'm sorry that she died, so young. But having those characters and having, a nod towards, femininity and maybe bubbling sexuality and having something, to, mirror, Ace, what she represents, and Kathleen and motherhood and blah, 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 blah. I think it's a brave attempt to throw all of that into the mix amongst a, to use a phrase, boy's own adventure that has, as I say, the refreshing element of Russian rather than German, and to have the ancient stone stuff and the the Viking ghost story element. It's a fusion of lots of marvelous things, and obviously quite a stuffed and dense text that has been pared to the bone, which means we get those lovely voiceovers over other scenes going on, which means we don't see people leaving one place and arriving at another. They're there. They deliver the important stuff. McCoy says something brooding and looks out into the distance and buggers off somewhere else to go and ask somebody something else. It's lovely. It's lovely. And Mark Ayres' music is an undercurrent, but it's got a military thing going on as well. But there's the nighttime scariness. I think it's, and this is the guy that directed The Mysterious Planet and Paradise Towers. And I think his pacing, his framing, his use of atmosphere, his casting is all bang on, Nicholas Mallet. Well done. And Ian Briggs' script has everything you could possibly want. So my goodness, it is a very, very, very good and a very, very satisfying episode of Doctor Who. Don't write in, by the way, if I've got some of the. I should have checked if I'd wanted to show off some. I mean, when was this on? Do that. I mean, 30 odd years ago. So that's when I was well into the Chekhovs. I mean, I've seen many of them many times since. I love the Seagull. That production of the Seagull I saw, by the way, had an actor I'd never heard of in the lead. Constantine was played by Simon Russell Beale, and Nina by Amanda Root. I've since been stared at her to read through at the Forsyte saga. She didn't smile back. But in that production, Alfred Burke was Sorin. Sabriakov was played by Trevor Martin. I saw Doctor Who on stage. I got to know Trevor a bit later. Jakob was played, who's got 3 lines, one of which is, "Can we go for a swim, sir?" was Arnold Yarrow. I've seen Bellal on stage. And he's still with us, whereas Trevor, sadly, is not. Alfred Burke is not. Trigorin was Roger Allam. There's an actor who should have been in Doctor Who. Arkadina was Susan Fleetwood. She was a magnificent actress who died far too young. She was amazing in that. They were all brilliant. Oh, and Katie Behan, who sadly died very tragically, was a great classical actress of that time. Graham Turner, who since turned up in Doctor Who. In the Scarlet Death one, and yeah, it was an absolutely top-notch cast. John Carlyle, who was marvelous as Dr. Dawn. Why am I talking about that production of The Seagull? Because yes, so just if I've stuck Gaev and Trofimov and Prozorov in the wrong place, don't write in, because as soon as I've done here, I'm going to go and check to remind myself, because I read and reread those Chekhov plays because they chimed with the Doctor Who. I mean, it was exactly the same time that this was happening. As this was going out, or as this was about to go out, I can't remember the exact timings. I was at Stratford watching this thing, and then I was flicking through Chekhov and noticing the names were the same as the names in the Doctor Who. So, of course, then I read the plays, because why would you not read the plays that have got characters named after characters in a Doctor Who story that you're absolutely loving? So, my education, where I read and reread, the major plays of Chekhov and some of his short stories, and then I think I chose to study them at university as well, when there was a module on Chekhov and Ibsen, and so I dived into all of that. But I mean, a lot of people do it because they're drawn to the Russian sensibility, or they love the sad humour of Chekhov's pieces, or the flawed characters that he writes so well, or his great skill and aptitude for capturing the sort of small, pathetic nature of man that leads to great individual tragedy, and juxtaposing the sort of small empty lives with the great loss that we feel when they are so empty. But that speaks to many people on a number of different levels of identification and emotion, and wonderful psychological insight, or greater comment about the tragicomic nature and futility of existence. And I did it because a lot of the characters got the same names as some Russian soldiers in The Curse of Fenric. I've never pretended to be an intellectual. So, good old Anton Chekhov. Yeah, good old, the non-Star Trek Chekhov. And that's, I think, going to be... I do love that scene of Millington. Well, I mean, if I'm going to choose my favourite thing, I know what I'm going to choose. And I think I knew pretty much going into this. But I'm still resting, because I love that scene of Millington, that establishing scene. I don't know why, it just speaks to me. It's the economy, the performance, the music, the cutting. It's just subtle and evocative. I love that establishing scene of Millington. I think it just really works. I love all the characters. I love the brooding, moody atmosphere. I love the lick that it goes at. I think the pacing of it is excellent. I think everyone in it is great. I love the World War II setting. So much of this is good. But I think I can't not choose that my favourite thing in episode 1, and because I think it affects the whole atmosphere and tone of the story, is the Russian soldiers, is the Russian element. It just seems so exciting and different and grown up for it not to be Germans. And of course that comes later important to the plot. But so it meant that we'd got a World War II, and World War II stories were so familiar for all the war films and Commando mags and all that sort of thing that I was growing up with. But to have World War II in Doctor Who seemed quite thrilling and exciting and obvious. And yet, hang on, but we don't. We don't have it except for. No, because the War Games is World War One, so it seemed really odd. It seemed sort of long overdue. But then to not go the obvious route and do the, well, I suppose do the Churchill and all of that, and I just and because it's had the personal element of the Chekhov thing, which was just perfectly timed for me to be doing Chekhov at college. It just seemed like Doctor Who was talking to me, and it's strange. And I know I'm not unique in this. We all have our own, versions of somehow. That there was something happening with a Doctor Who story that reflected something in my life, or there was a reference, or somebody I knew ended up being. We all have that thing where Doctor Who suddenly seems like it's weaving very specially into our lives, and I certainly feel that it's done that frequently. On a number of occasions under lots of different circumstances, and this was one of them where my love and obsession for this Doctor Who story tied in with an obsession I had with Chekhov plays, which were part of my theatre studies education that I was doing at college. And college, they had the collected works of Chekhov, so I took them out voluntarily and read them, and so it helped me with my course with doing drama, and sort of enabled me to show off as well, because I was well read, because I'd read the Cherry Orchard and Three Sisters, and blah blah blah. What is it with Nell says, I ate those Russian places, all about women staring out of windows talking about ducks flying to Moscow. Ha ha! Great line. But I love the Russian. So I am going to choose as my favourite thing for episode 1 of a brilliant episode, a flawless episode, bar the subtitles, which look like they've been printed off one of those printers that would have been at my mum's work, the sort of dot matrix printers. Minus marks for that. You should have just gone for grown-up, normal subtitles. And the way that Petrosian runs and sort of does a sort of... He's not meaning to be comic. It's just a film from an unfortunate angle. And I'm not wild about the Gene and Phyllis and Miss Hardacre, that the realization of that. I know what they're driving at, but I don't think they're 100% successful. But in many Doctor Who stories, those things wouldn't stick out quite so much because they'd be, and perhaps they wouldn't seem as egregious as perhaps they're not, and they wouldn't be in other Doctor Who stories. But just because the quality, just because they're surrounded by so much that is excellent, I acknowledge those bits that don't quite pass muster for me, because again, this is very much me at the time. Always had an eye on people walking in when I'm watching Doctor Who, and I wanted them to walk in, see something amazing, and go, Toby, you're right. Doctor Who is the best program ever. I am now a fan too, and I will be your friend. I brought the videotapes of this season to parties. We'd have drunken parties, and then in the morning we'd get up and I'd put them on, and again, hope my friends would kind of, really get into it. With this one, I'll talk about what happened with this one later, because it involves a character who we've not really seen, although he does get a credit in this episode, but he's not had any lines. But we'll talk about him later. I think some of you will know to whom I'm alluding, because I think he floats the boats of people who play for every single team. But we'll get into that. But also, I say with a certain amount of shame that I took the videotapes of this season to parties. I sometimes feel, as though I've never quite fitted in and blah, 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 blah. Actually, I've had really good friends at school and at college and at university who've indulged my passion for Doctor Who in a way that I look back at now and go, God, people were nice. God, people were indulgent. And my genuine love for Doctor Who has I think been very much indulged by friends and partners and people in the past in a way that I sometimes think now, I don't know how lucky I was. Anyway, my thing for episode 1 is all the Russianness of the Curse of Fenric. The Russian soldiers, the Russian language, the Russian Chekhovian names. What's Alan's? But with an acknowledgement of that opening scene for Judson, for Millington, which I think is gorgeous. Allan Lear, what is your favourite thing about episode 1 of The Curse of Fenric?
Episode 1. Now, for episode 1, it's got to be the setting. The lovingly created interiors with the church and the beautiful realism of the setting there, and more importantly the landscape and the glorious ocean, and there's also the Viking boat is beautifully realised as well, I think. But the whole setting of Curse of Fenric is really effective and atmospheric, and I'm really pleased that they were able to persuade JNT not to go with internal sets for it, but do on location shooting. That was marvellous.
Yes, I suppose that was a thing I could have guessed, that Alan might have gone for, because when you're assessing what you like about a story at entry level, its setting is pretty much, stop one, really, isn't it? But I couldn't betray my Russian boys, but I think the setting is excellent, and yes, the fact that it's shot all on location gives it a sort of convincing continuity. I'm not always wild about all videotape production, but and sometimes I think you can have problems with sort of clumpy sound, or fairly muzzy lighting that's compromised. But I actually think it's it can all look a bit corporate video sometimes. You're fighting space aliens with all the atmosphere of a infomercial for Portaloos. But I think Nick Mallet shoots this well enough, and everybody acts it well enough that it brings you into it, and there's a moody atmosphere to it, as much as can be mustered on stark videotape with a lot of natural lighting. Yeah, the setting is a fair enough choice, but I had to choose my Russian boys, and if I hadn't chosen my Russian boys, I had to choose Commander Millington's opening scene. But I do obviously think the setting is genius, long overdue to set Doctor Who there, and they do enough with the setting to shake it up to make it seem like a fresh and interesting take. World War II plus ancient sea monsters. What's not to love? So much to love about The Curse of Fenric. I know I'm going to enjoy doing this one. There will be no hardship, and it's amazing how well I know it as well. My goodness, I mean, I know it better than obviously. I don't quite remember. I assumed the Chekhov knowledge was residing in the back of my head, but those synapses are obviously fraying a little bit, because I'm sure not that long ago I'd have just gone biff bang biff. But I can still give you the name of every actor in this, so I've retained the important stuff. So so perhaps some of my undercurrents of stop moving. There's nothing there anymore. It's just flat with no activity. There's nothing going on beneath the surface anymore. So none of it works. Anyway, I really enjoyed that. I hope you did too. I hope you loved The Curse of Fenric. I think it's one of Doctor Who's finest. I think it's one of Sylvester McCoy's finest. They're both great in it as well. I love the sort of brooding Doctor who's going from place to place, just saying something spooky and then zipping off somewhere else to say something spooky to someone else. A graveyard. It's got a graveyard. Said it church graveyard. Yeah, said it on a beach. Said it in an army barracks. Said it in a church with a graveyard. These are all great places where terrible things can happen. The sense of the geography chosen. It's very, very clever. Well done, Ian Briggs. Well done, Nick Mallet. Well done, Andrew Cartmel. Well done, Mark Ayres. It's all, and what a cast. It all comes together. So, beautiful. The Curse of Fenric. Which I remember was announced as being the Wolves of Fenric. But, which I think is a slightly better title. But I can also understand why you would change it, because they're not literal wolves or even werewolves. You'd be watching it and going, apart from the fact you'd be watching it and going, where are the wolves? Anyway, shut up. Actually, I'm not going to entirely shut up just yet, because once this episode was recorded originally and put on Patreon, this isn't a plug, but I'll mention it anyway, patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where you get everything a little bit earlier, and you also get the chance for some feedback. And I'd mused at the thought of getting Andrew Cartmel's contribution, because he's always offered if I want a little bit of extra insight. I don't like to bother people, though. But I mentioned it, and all of the Patreon feedback said definitely get Andrew on, because he's not on the commentary, and, it's such an important story. So I chanced my arm, and Andrew said yes. So what we're going to do now, because that hadn't been the plan, and I hadn't done that when I recorded the commentary for this episode, is before we draw this particular installment of this podcast to a close is that we are going to jump on the ultimate machine, the laptop, and speak to the script editor of The Curse of Fenric, who has a lot of thoughts and insights into this remarkable Doctor Who story. I'd done episode 1 of this, and then I'd said, "Oh, I remember Andrew saying when we did Dragonfire, if ever I was doing another one, I should let him know." And everyone went, "Yeah, we really need to hear Andrew on this because he's not on the commentary on the DVD." This is from Jim Smith, who's a very smart chap who's written many a book about Doctor Who. And Jim also says, because I was very positive about episode 1, and I was saying how I love the transmitted version, as much as any other. And he said, "Lovely to see someone sticking up for the transmitted version of Fenric. Season poll winning it may have been, but the rapid release of the extended VHS and the wonderful expanded novelization saw the original version end up as slightly written off as, to borrow a phrase, sent into this world scarce half made up. And I really don't think it is. I know Andrew Cartmel now thinks the TX version is as a kind of write-off, but the other versions all contain stuff he missed from the TX. But that's because he's inside the process. From the outside, the original version really worked for me, and it still does. They got it as right as they could under the circumstances, and I think Andrew should be proud of that," he says. So there we go.
Okay, a couple of things there. First of all, what's the source of the quote?
Richard III. I was sent into this world scarce half made up.
That hack Shakespeare strikes again. Okay, so just for anybody who doesn't know, TX means transmission, the transmission version, the version that went out on the telly. Well, he's not wrong in the sense that I can only see it from an insider's point of view. And so it was not a case of retroactively thinking, oh, the long version's better and the transmission version isn't. It was when the transmission version went out, my head was in my hands. Because I knew how great it was, and I knew what would hit the screen just did not work. And I have a very specific and detailed analysis of what the problem is, if you want to hear it. Okay, the problem is there was way too much material. It was too long to go out. Now, there is a school of thought that that's the script editor's problem, but my school of thought is that the director has to time it based on how he knows he's going to shoot it and give it. And if there's some sense that it's going to be too long, let us know and we can fix it. There was none of that. So, Nick Mallett, a terrific director, but whoever on his team, including him, didn't do that is responsible for it being too long. I take no responsibility for that. But the fact is, it was way too long. Now, the way to have fixed that, the way that John Nathan Turner was a brilliant editor, there's a couple of things he was great at, particularly great at, creatively shifting a budget, because he had no money, but he could achieve great things with almost no money. That was one thing. The other thing was he actually had a natural gift for editing, because I sat with him while we edited with the directors there, and John would make suggestions, and they were always terrific suggestions. He could have been an editor. So John was a good editor, but what he did with this was all wrong. There was way too much stuff. So the way that he fixed it was to take a little bit out of everything, like to reduce everything a little bit, which might sound like a good idea, but it was not a good idea because it ended up nothing, to me, worked. Everything was rushed. There was no breathing space. I felt that you could almost dub in sort of Keystone Cops music over some of it, they're just rushing around back and forth. And it ruined it, frankly. And I thought a lot about this. And the thing to do was not to try and reduce everything by a little bit. It was to lose something, to lose some strand or subplot in its entirety or almost in its entirety, then leave everything else at its current length and let everything else breathe and work. And I've thought about this, and the way to have done that would have been to have lost, if not all, then most of the Nicholas Parsons strand. Now, it's it's a masterpiece, but something's got to go. In my mind, something had to go. And that was the thing that could go without affecting the main thrust of the story. I mean, if you go back and analyze it, if you can come up with something that's a better nomination than that, please tell me. But I think that one had to be ruthless and just decide that has to hit the cutting room floor. And in a feature film, I think it would have done. Now, it's great stuff, which is one reason John wouldn't have done it. But I think the other reason John would never have countenanced that is because it featured Nicholas Parsons, who was a big name guest star. And John loved his guest stars. He loved him a guest star. And he would never have even considered that. And I never suggested, it's not as though I said this at the time and he ignored it. I didn't even think of it till years later that would have been the way to do it. That would have been the solution. Lose something almost in its entirety or in its entirety and let everything else breathe. So that's what they should have done, something of that nature to Fenric. But doesn't matter, because the transmission version was only one version, it turns out. And then they did the extended cut, and the extended cut just worked. Like when I saw it, I was astonished. And it's not often in life that we get a second chance on these things, because Fenric had been a fantastic script, which had had the great good fortune to be well shot, with a good cast, good director. So good script actually turned into a good TV show, and then destroyed in the editing for reasons of duration, for reasons of making it fit the transmission lengths. But then it came back. And I thought that was that. I really thought that was that. Too bad about Fenric was what I thought. And then I saw the extended cut, and I was just so grateful. I mean, thank God that they hadn't recorded snooker over it for a start. All the other, all the extra bits, because that was. I seem to remember that was the standard procedure otherwise. So thank you to everybody who's done that. And if people like the original version, that's even better, because it means there's no bad version really. But from my point of view, that's the way I see it.
Well, there's a lot of love coming for the original version, and there's two things that strike me on that. One, if you had cut the Nicholas Parsons bit, for somebody who spent his entire career encouraging people to consolidate something to just a minute, he wouldn't have been able to have felt too chastened by it. It was all about the consolidation.
What a great thought! I'd completely forgotten that connection. I mean, I knew who he was, but I'd forgotten that you might be able to make that comparison. How lovely.
And the other thing was, I was an angry teenager, and I was convinced Doctor Who was not as good as it used to be, and that and all of that crap that you go through as a teenager, which of course I grew out of. But even at the time, through being that angry teenager and always looking at the things that worried me or I thought were wrong with Doctor Who, The Curse of Fenric catapulted its way into my top 10 and has remained there ever since. And that's in the original version, and I watched and rewatched that original version over and over again, and I still love it. So again, you know what babies were killed, but we never saw them being born. So to use that,
well, no, the thing is, you've seen those babies grow to maturity, because you've seen the long version. The babies that were killed on the TX version, but it's all worked out, which is great. I always see the flaws in these things. The Chief Hemivore, those costumes aren't great. I mean, I remember Ken True doing the color sketches of them, and they're beautiful, but it's just styrofoam or whatever they make that stuff out of. His jaw doesn't work. I see it flapping around. I felt that the whole, I've always argued this, and John never agreed with me. The way to go with monsters and Doctor Who is pretty much the way the vampire girls are in the ones I've just proposed cutting in the Nicholas Parsons. That was the way to do it, with that long fingernails, scary eyes. As human as possible is my argument. Simply because we couldn't do the guy in the rubber suit very well. I mean, nobody could until Ridley Scott did Alien. Nobody did the guy in the rubber suit at all well, I feel.
No,
let me correct myself. The Destroyer was great. The Destroyer was great in Battlefield.
I like the Hemivores, but I think the ones that look a bit more human with the hair are slightly better than the sort of corally monstery ones. So actually the ones that you see a bit less of, when they're rising out from the sea, they're the ones, because they look a bit more like a zombie. They're a bit more of a parody of an undead human than a sort of corally blue monster.
And the aesthetic approach, that they're encrusted like the hull of a ship. I mean, it all makes sense. But it just ends up looking like dodgy rubber monsters. And forgive me for saying this. I think the story still works, but I've always had this thing with Doctor Who, that we did great work, but you're walking a tightrope. I remember when we did the press screening of Delta and the Bannermen, which had a lot of great stuff going for it. But I was sitting there beside members of the press, and we'd had this terrible disaster where the makeup crew had basically just gone out in the piss the night before, and the following morning they just decided that the alien was just going to have bits. I've said this elsewhere, but it's still true. He just had bits of cotton wool stuck on his face, dyed green. That was the way the alien. And John came, saw this, blew up, and insisted that they do a better job. But the trouble is, they'd already shot some footage with this ridiculous face. So there I am, cut forward to Fenric. Sorry, I beg your pardon. To Malcolm Sir Bannerman being finished, edited, all right, and being shown to the press at big press launch junket. And I'm sitting there, and it's going pretty well. And then we get a shot of this guy with his cotton wool green face beside me. This press woman, this journalist goes, suppressed laughter. And I thought, she's right. She's right. It is laughable, but also, we're from this point on. Can I swear in this podcast?
Yeah.
We're fucked. So from that point on, we were fucked. And we were fucked because somebody just didn't do their job properly. And the trouble with special effects, especially monster effects, and the more ambitious they are, the more alien the creature is, the more exposed you are to somebody just not. And even people who are desperately trying to do a great job might not be able to pull it off for all, because they don't have the time, they don't have the materials, or they perhaps just don't have the aptitude. It's not always neglect or malice. Sometimes the people are working their hearts out. This still doesn't work. But this was a problem at the time because we didn't have much of a budget, we didn't have much time, and also special effects were in their infancy. I mean, now presumably on our MacBook Airs, we could create better effects than some of the effects we had in the show at the time. But I think that Fenric survives that. I think all of the Doctor Who stories did survive that, but I'm always wary of showing them to somebody who's not an initiate, who's not an insider, because you might get that first snigger and then they're jolted out of it. And they don't, it's not, it isn't, they shouldn't, it shouldn't be the case, that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be that it's inevitable that there's going to be something dodgy that's going to jolt people out of the narrative. It was within our ability to do a show where you never had those sniggers. I mean, people could not like it, but they wouldn't have been able to judge it on the basis of just really dodgy effects. So that's just a long diatribe about the way I felt. Don't get me started on the cheetah people in survival.
But I think it behoves us as an audience. I remember a comedian who's not a telly fan at all, called Jeff Innocent, who's a big old Cockney guy. He says, "Oh, you like the old telly, don't you, Toby?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah. What problem with us nowadays is that." Decided that television had to look real all the time. He said, I was brought up on stuff and you knew it wasn't real, but you enjoyed it anyway. And I think what he was trying to say was, you met stuff on its own terms and it ill behoves you to do otherwise because all you're doing is going, well, I know that's not real. Well, we know it's not real anyway. It's whether we're prepared to meet something on its own terms and accept what it's trying to do.
What we're talking about there, Toby, is slightly different. We're almost talking about theatre, aren't we? Where you're in the theatre and it's an illusion and it's an agreed illusion and you can have people with two chairs and a board, and it's supposed to be the Land of Oz, and it can be the Land of Oz if it's well done and if our imaginations are open. But this is a slightly different thing. This is where there's actually an attempt to do an explicit representation of something, and it would have been possible for some television production teams to have achieved that, whereas others didn't. Because I mean, there are things in the Quatermass stories, the early Quatermass serials. It's not consistently great, but when it works, it's sometimes fantastic, right? So it's certainly not inevitable that television in that period had to look dodgy. It was just some kind of failing each time. That's where I stand on it.
Well, let's put the failings to one side. I'm going to take you on a whistle-stop tour, episode by episode. We've been nominating our favourite things about The Curse of Fenric, episode by episode. So episode one.
I nominate my favourite thing.
Yeah, so what's your favourite thing for episode one?
Well, it's the same for all the episodes. It's Ian Briggs. Without genius. I mean, it's a really Briggsian story. And everything that we're going to talk about is a consequence of his writing. So that's just, I wanted to say that at the top.
Yes, it's extraordinary that because it's very different from well, I suppose it's not that it's it's because Dragonfire has the sort of the baddies a sort of Nazi guy, isn't he? It's all that militaristic stuff, but it's that synthesis that he has of the ancient and the period setting, and burgeoning technology, but it's little touches like what I chose for my favorite thing for episode 1 was the fact that those one section of protagonists are Russian. As me, I just, it was timed with the first time I'd seen a Chekhov play at the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Oh
but
my
Russian
God.
just seemed slightly. I'd seen lots of war films, but everyone had been Germans and English.
Yes.
So the Russian aesthetic just seemed to give it something that made it feel, to me as a teenage boy watching it, a little bit more grown up, a little bit more eclectic. It gave it a little bit more verisimilitude. So that was my thing. Whereas Alan's thing, who's my guest on this podcast, he chose the World War II setting, which kind of is tied in with that, which seemed to give this story a particular feel.
Okay, that set me up perfectly for what I had to say, because I sat down with Ian. We thought very carefully about what we wanted to do, because you say it's very different from Dragonfire. To me, the biggest difference is that it's better directed, more sympathetically directed. And I was going to say the design is better, but that's not true. The design in Dragonfire was actually great, but the lighting was rubbish. So the design was not sympathetically lit, but you got good design and good lighting in in Fenric. So what I'm saying is they're not as different as you think. It's just that one was really well presented to us and the other isn't, i.e. Dragonfire wasn't. So Briggs and I sat down thinking very carefully about what we were going to do for the next one. And quite early on, we decided World War II, because the BBC does period stuff so great. I don't know if at that point we'd already begun to see how wonderful Ghostlight was looking. I can't remember what the sequence was, but Ghostlight is a classic example of a great Doctor Who story because it's Victorian period. The BBC is great at period. In any case, we were smart enough to know that we wanted to do an Earth-based story because they're always better because it's so hard to create an alien planet. And we wanted to do an historical story because the BBC is so great at that. And quite early on, we thought World War II, brilliant. But we thought, let's do something different. Like the standard take on World War II is Germans. So let's not go down that route. Let's have the Russians. That's exactly what we thought. We just thought we'll dodge the obvious one and make it Russians. And that just, in the same way that for you, it made it way better, for us, it made it way better too. And that was such a crucial decision. World War II and Russians really give it a special flavor and make it outstanding.
Yeah. And if you're a pretentious drama student, as I was at the time, the fact that I could spot which Chekhov plays all the names came from as well.
Oh, that's great. We see that's all totally Briggsian, because I still don't know much about. I just finished missing a production of A Cherry Orchard because I had a mouse in the house. This is a true story. I woke up, there's a mouse, and I had to deal with a mouse in the house, and I missed a matinee of The Cherry Orchard. But that strikes me as a rather Chekhovian thing to have happened.
Yeah, actually. Absolutely. Why wasn't she here? Because there was a mouse in the house. Yeah, absolutely.
And all of which to say, I didn't know that he was smuggling in Chekhov character names, but that's so Briggs, and I think that's so wonderful.
They are all Chekhov. So if you'd seen the Cherry Orchard, I think Vershinin is the Cherry Orchard.
Oh, that's wonderful. I didn't know this. Thank you. I'm learning things.
Petorossi, and they're all in there. And in fact, Prozorov he changes in the book to Trofimov, but they're both names from Chekhov as well. Even the guy on the beach who doesn't get any lines, who's Gaev, who's a bit vague. Gaev is a Chekhov as well. So they're all there.
I'm going to be on the email to Briggs right after this. It's so hilarious and wonderful too. Really great.
Yeah, nice touch.
He's a classy guy, Briggs, Ian Briggs, and that also perhaps speaks to his great ability to create characters. I've worked with wonderful writers on Doctor Who, but Ian Briggs always struck me as the one who is the most gifted at creating three-dimensional characters, and perhaps that's one reason why is that his diet, the diet of his mind was things like Chekhov.
Well, that was a nice bonus, wasn't it? A contribution from Andrew Cartmel, for which I'm very grateful. Thanks to Andrew, who was the script editor of The Curse of Fenric. He'll be back for episodes 2, 3 and 4, as will Allan Lear, and as will I, Toby Haydoke, your host. And hopefully by the end of this little excursion back in time, The Curse of Fenric will be something less of an enigma. Well, splasiba for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Allan Lear. I'm grateful to Allan and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Tom White, Stephen White, Sydney Wilson, Andrew Willis, Rhys Williams, Michael Williams, Rich Wiggins, Adam Westwood, Gary Wales, Apollo C. Vermouth, Sabrina Tirabassi, Damien Timmer, Nick Temple, Neil Tate, Stephen, all small case, no surname. Furnish me with those things if you want me to say them out loud. Surname. Tim Smith, David Shepherdson, Graham Slate, Keith Say, Jim Sangster, Mark Sandham, John Rivers, Dylan Rees, Scott Pride, Kevin Parker, Jonathan Potter, Melvin Pena, Dave Owen, Graham Knott, Matthew Newton, Christopher Newman, Ian Morgan, Nathan Moore, Stuart Mitchell, Ross McPhillips, Jason Mayer, David Matthewman, Steve Manfred and Gavin McLean. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork Dylan Patterson. Okay, so if you would like your name read out on the credits, you can do so by becoming a patron. It's one of the perks. You get many a perk in Patreonville for as little as £3 a month. You get your name read out on the credits. You get it read out more frequently the higher you go up the tiers. I mean, there aren't many other extra bonuses to going up the tiers. Yeah, go on, sell it, Toby. Because everything is available at ground level, which is £3 a month. You get your name read out at £3 a month, which is not as often as you get your name read out if you do it for £1 million a month. There isn't the £1 million tier, but I mean, I'll make one if you want to. Oh, there wasn't much of a gap there, was there, between the closing titles and that musical sting? That was there, just sitting there as a cue waiting to happen, which is why I just got to the natural end of that sentence. I mean, it interrupted me, really. I normally do this whole section as one section and then have a cue, but heck, it's like being live. So, yes, Patreonville, £3 a month, up to $1 million if you want. I mean, it might take some organising on my part, but I'm prepared to have a bash. And you get 10% off if you sign up for a whole year at whatever tier you're at. But most stuff is available at even the lowest tier, and that's bonus releases, exclusive releases, and of course everything is released much, much earlier on Patreon. I'm having to replace the original post-credits sequence, which is supposed to be disposable and ephemeral and not very important, but it would have been inaccurate because I've just listened back to it just to make sure it didn't have anything like going, oh, I think we should get Andrew Cartmel on this, and him already being there. If I have said that elsewhere in the podcast, sorry, I don't want to listen to the whole thing through again. So if it's a sort of work that evolves in front of your ears, that's fair enough. But this bit had to go because it's me going, oh, yeah, I'm sorry about those short music stings. They just crept up on me. But come on, you've had 51 minutes of a podcast. That's enough. If the curse of Fenric proves anything to us, it's that cutting stuff down to its core can actually be very good for it. And since I recorded that and released that episode, which only went out on Patreon because then it was decided to add a sprinkle of Cartmelian wisdom onto it, it's actually got longer than it was. So the podcast that ended with me going, yeah, I think it's much better if we're concise and cut away the flab, has had an extra 20 minutes added to it. But it's 20 minutes of Andrew Cartmel, so it's not flab. It's insight and wisdom and good company. He's a nice guy, Andrew, and gave his time there very willingly in order to give some insight into the story. But yeah, I sort of vowed in the original post credits. This is very much a here's what you could have won, isn't it? Here's the bullseye speedboat of the post credits genre. Yeah, I think I went, well, yes, in future I will boil down episodes of Happy Times and Places to just to the important core ingredients. And I thought I could even edit out all the ums and ahs. And then I thought, God no, I've already got too much to do. I'm afraid this is how it is. But this one is how it is and slightly longer. But anyway, yeah, I'd left the original one musing on the idea that less was more, and I was going to leave you with less so that you could do more. But as it is, I've given you more. but it's all right, more or less.